ni ni sa 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 ga ma re sa re ni ni sa 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 ga pa ma re sa ni sa 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 ga ma re ni sa sa sa. Assalamu alaikum, ladies and gentlemen. This is Haider Mehdi, your host, and welcome to Perspectives. Today we're going to have a really interesting discussion with someone who's not a Pakistani, but she's traveled all over the country. She's also lived in Pakistan for 3 years and has a very interesting story to tell us.
Made paagul umreekee larki hoon.
I'd like to welcome Cynthia Dawn Ritchie. Cynthia, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Haider. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, Cynthia. Thank you for coming on the show. Quick question. I know we're going to talk about a lot more things, but why Pakistan? What took you to Pakistan?
I was originally working on a political campaign out of Houston, Texas in 2010. And when my candidate won, she was actually voted into office primarily by Pakistani Americans. They were her biggest constituency. And so when the floods of 2010 happened in Pakistan, I was actually invited over by the Pakistani Americans to do a sort of informal assessment, humanitarian trip, as it were. And so I wound up spending a couple of wonderful weeks there.
Weren't you scared? And what were your thoughts before going to the country?
I actually intended, whenever I travel to a new country, and I am a bit of a world traveler, I tend to be more of a tabula rasa. I want to be a blank slate. Instead of allowing preconceived notions to fill my mind or allowing the media to unduly influence how I feel about a country, I want that country to reveal itself to me.
Didn't people tell you, there's a lot of killing going on, violence, terror?
Well, I mean, you hear about these things in the media, but
Right.
practically speaking, we know that the media sensationalizes many, many things. And because I was traveling with people that I knew and that I trusted, I felt like that I was going to be relatively safe.
What did you do in Pakistan? What were your objectives? Why did you go there? And, after the initial assessment, what happened? Tell us your story.
Well, Pakistani Americans, I found, were very keen to help their country throughout the humanitarian crisis. But in their words, there were so many INGOs and aid organizations operating in Pakistan that they did not know who to give their money to. They didn't know who they could trust. And so I was invited to sort of travel the country and get an idea of a number of organizations functioning and to essentially come back and report what I found to the Pakistani Chamber of Commerce in Houston, Texas. And so for me, it was a true eye-opener because I not only get to travel a brand new country, I get to delve into a little bit more of the world known as humanitarian aid.
So you lived there for 3 years?
I eventually did, yes.
Yeah, and you worked there, and how did that happen?
Well, I wound up sort of giving up my life in Houston, Texas. As a little girl, I wanted to be an Egyptian archaeologist. I wanted to immerse myself into a culture that was very foreign from everything that I knew. And so at the time, the Federal Health Ministry invited me to come back to Pakistan, be an adjunct lecturer. I got offered to be a country director for an INGO. And so I thought, okay, this is what I'm going to do with my life for the next couple of years and learn about the humanitarian aid world and get to travel and experiment with different cultures and microcosms of cultures within Pakistan. And it turned out to be one of the most interesting experiences of my life.
So tell us a little more about it. I know you've produced a video, a documentary, like a small pilot, which apparently has gone viral on the internet, and that's how we connected as well. How did that come about?
Well, the video was as a consequence of me having lived and traveled in Pakistan, and I got approached by a number of media houses that told me about a program called George Ka Pakistan.
Oh, George Ka Pakistan.
George Ka Pakistan.
Right,
and they said, Cynthia, you've traveled Pakistan so much now that you should consider doing something like that. Maybe Cynthia Aur Pakistan. And so I thought, interesting, let me look into this program. And I loved it. I loved the idea of a foreigner traveling through Pakistan. And what was more telling to me were the facial expressions of Pakistanis, because they would just light up when they would talk about George. They clearly loved seeing their country through a foreigner's eyes. And so when this idea was first broached to me, it was 2011. And as we know, 2010, 2011 were not really good years for U.S.-Pakistan relations. And so I sort of put that idea on back burner until now. And that's what I'm in the process of doing, is going on this adventure travel reality program. A foreigner explores Pakistan, contemporary Pakistan, and gets to experience the faiths and spend time with families and enjoy the delicious foods on her journey.
Tell us about that experience. What did you find? What did you discover about this side of Pakistan, which never gets, the story doesn't get told out here in the U.S. and
Precisely.
in the Western world?
Precisely. So if you recall, I wanted to be an archaeologist, and so how I sort of define my role today is I think of myself as a social archaeologist, dusting off the layers of media propaganda. In other words, these incredible stories that we've uncovered, it's not something that we've created or manufactured. These are in existence, but for some reason the media is not focusing on these stories. What we do hear about in Pakistan is a patriarchal society that subjugates its women. We hear about militancy, religious extremism, healthcare and education crises, a litany of issues that just goes on and on and on. And there's certainly no doubt that there are many, many problems in Pakistan. We're not negating the issues. We're just simply saying that there are other facets to this kaleidoscope of civilization.
So what motivates you to present this face of Pakistan? I mean, you're kind of, in a way, an ambassador when you present this other softer, nicer, gentler Pakistan.
You know, I think if it's really about humanity for me at this point. We, as you know, we live in a very complex world. When you cannot turn on the radio or the TV or any sort of media for that matter without hearing about racism and xenophobia and Islamophobia and Black Lives Matter and Blue Lives Matter, Trans Lives Matter, Native Americans versus big oil. I don't think that there's really any segment of society today that doesn't feel as if it's at war with something or someone, or if they don't feel like that they're under attack in some capacity. And so this is my small effort to try to bring back the humanity, to help remind us of who we are as humans being. And while we should celebrate our diversity, I believe that the focus should primarily be on what we have in common. And the further I traveled, Pakistan is the other side of the world from where I grew up, the further I traveled, the less I realized, the more I learned, the less I realized I actually knew. But the further I traveled, the more I realized also how much more we had in common.
Wow, that's really interesting, huh? An American girl from the South going to Pakistan and finds a lot more in common. So you travel really the length and breadth of Pakistan, from Chitral, Jamrud, Dadu, Sevan Sharif, Matli, Quetta, Lahore, of course Islamabad, I'm sure. What did you most enjoy about this piece, about these travels?
I've certainly crisscrossed Pakistan. I've had the pleasure of traveling throughout all the provinces, and the unique experience of getting to travel throughout FATA, which really doesn't happen too terribly often.
FATA, this is
FATA.
Waziristan and all
Correct.
those areas. Wow.
Correct.
Okay.
And to me, that was a true honor, because I believe that the people of FATA along the tribal belt are often overlooked, and they are unfortunately in the crosshairs of a conflict that I believe that they did not invite, nor do they certainly want. And because of that precarious situation, they are often unfairly, in my opinion, smeared with a negative media campaign that is not their fault. And so for me, it was an honor to be able to interact with them, meet them, just see how hospitable they really are. The Pashtun are fiercely protective. They are a fierce people, but they are also a very loving people. And when you are an invited guest into their territories, they will die to protect you. And To be able to learn a little bit about Pashtunwali and their very ancient culture was completely fascinating for me, and that's a part of what we hope to tell in this story of my travels.
Cynthia, this is so interesting. It reminds me of this phrase that you describe yourself. What do you call yourself?
A social archaeologist.
A social archaeologist and also a paagul.
पागल अमरीकी लड़की हूँ.
मैं पागल अमरीकी लड़की हूँ. So, ये पागल अमरीकी लड़की, what did she discover about Pakistan that she really wants to showcase to the world? Because I remember you saying a comment in one of our conversations. You said someone asked you, do they have running water in their homes? So given that context.
Yes. Well, yeah, I think the West, for the many wonderful things that we have as a Western society, we are largely ignorant of so many other cultures. Some people describe Pakistan as a third world country. I think of it as a re-emerging market. There are so many possibilities in Pakistan as an adventure traveler. One of the reasons why I liked Pakistan so much is because there are so many microcosms of societies and cultures. I mean, you can go from Dadu Tata village, Makli, at the seabed, and you have this desert terrain at one end of the country, and then traverse the opposite, and you're at the head of three of the world's largest mountain ranges, the Himalayas, the Hindu Kush, and the Karakoram. So you have such a diversity in topography, geography within one country. Forest and whitewater rafting and paragliding. So many amazing things happening in Pakistan just from an adventure tourism perspective. And then on top of that, you have so many cultures just around the corner that are very different from one another. And that includes their histories, who they are as it relates to contemporary society, their foods. There's just no way that one could ever get bored in Pakistan, which is one of the reasons why this paagul larki loves traveling throughout the region.
So this is great. So what does all mean for you and your project, and where does it take you next? What are you going to do with all this information, this experience, this learning, these insights? What next?
So we're in the middle of production. Right now I still have quite a bit to do.
Production of?
So this travel adventure reality series. So
Okay.
you see this foreigner traveling through Pakistan, and the common theme that you see is faith, family, and food.
Faith, family, and food.
Faith, family,
Nice.
and food, right. So as a
Okay.
Christian, she gets to experience the many faiths in Pakistan. Of course, she visits mosques and she speaks to an imam to learn more about Islam.
Okay.
She also visits Sikh gurdwaras.
This is your documentary.
Correct.
Okay, right.
Hindu temples.
Wow.
She visits with Christian families and goes to a Christian church. So she gets to experience a lot of the religious minorities and how they live and some of their success stories as well. All we hear about, again, is the negativity as it relates
Right.
to religious minorities in Pakistan. What we don't hear about is that there are also many success stories as well.
Yeah.
So the goal here is to enlighten, educate, inform the Western viewer as to Pakistan. We look at the histories, the cultures, we enjoy food along the way. We have an outdoor adventure scene that shows a different side of Pakistan than what's typically portrayed in the media.
Right.
We address serious topics of concern
Okay.
and show what locals are doing to address those topics of concern.
Okay.
And then we end up hopefully on an optimistic note, a hope for the future scene.
Oh. Pakistanis are known for their hospitality and their welcoming nature and how they're very proud of. We're very proud of our heritage. We're very proud of our culture, and we feel uncomfortable when we think we're not being presented in the right way to the world. As a consequence, there's a bit of skepticism that creeps in when we encounter someone wanting to tell a story about Pakistan. Did you encounter some skepticism about what you were doing and, why you were doing this?
Of course.
Okay.
I think
Tell us
that's-
about it.
I think that's natural. I think it's part and parcel. If anyone spends time in Pakistan, they know that the histories have been rather intriguing if nothing else, within Pakistan. And so one has to go in understanding that there are people that are simultaneously, they have their own cognitive dissonance, they have their own conflicting feelings about a guest. And so initially the hospitality kicks in, oh, we welcome the guest, and guests are like a special gift from God. But then she stays here longer and longer and longer, and then maybe what's she really doing in Pakistan? And
Right.
so these are things that I naturally did encounter, and for me it was initially shocking and at times a little bit frustrating, because I was invited to Pakistan, and every time I've been to Pakistan it's always been by either invitation and or proper facilitation.
Right.
So, and to me that's really important also because of how I was raised. My parents taught me from a very early age, always try to be on your good behavior, but when you are in someone else's home, you should be on your best behavior because you are representing your family name, your faith, your culture,
Right.
and
You're
so
an
forth.
ambassador.
And so I did have those frustrations, but I also understand where it comes from. Many Pakistanis in today's society are not accustomed to seeing an outsider be so vocal and be such a staunch advocate for a largely misunderstood culture.
Absolutely, and it's a testimony to your persistence. Let me put it that way. That you despite I'm sure some of those challenges that came here, you pushed through. Let's kind of change tack a bit and tell us about some specific incidents that you encountered, which stand out in these 3 years, and perhaps also in the making of your documentary.
One of the first experiences that...
The worst or the first?
The first.
The
One of the
first,
first experiences that I had that really stood out for me was when I was touring an IDP camp.
Okay.
IDP being an acronym for internally displaced persons.
Yes.
And
This was where?
This was in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa.
Okay.
This was about an hour outside of Peshawar, closer to the Afghan border.
Okay.
And so this elderly woman had lost everything in the floods of 2010.
Okay.
And she was situated in a structure that was part of a crumbling wall and had a blue UNHCR tent on top of it, or sort of a sheet as the roof. And when she saw me, she just brought me into her residence, and she had
that little
residence, a pile of belongings in the background. She had a makeshift brick oven made from a pile of several bricks. She clearly had very little, but what she did have, she shared with me. She made me a cup of tea. She shared with her some of her biscuits and rations, and she just put her hands on my head and kissed my forehead. And in that particular moment, even though I did not speak the local language, and even though she did not speak English, the lesson that she taught me was that compassion is a universal language. And so that was one of the most beautiful moments that really sort of helped form and shape my experience as I journeyed through Pakistan. And in the most rural of areas, to me, some of the most generous Pakistanis were actually some of the poorest.
That's true. America is deeply misunderstood in Pakistan. And as is Pakistan deeply misunderstood in the US, right?
Absolutely.
What did you experience on this count, and how did you explain the perception of American foreign policy which, to the common people that you came across, and I'm sure people asked you questions like, why does America do this, and why are they there, and why did they attack, and this. How did you address these issues? I'm sure they came up in all conversations, right?
They do. I think one of the interesting things is that Pakistanis think that because I'm an American, I know exactly what's going on with the American government. Okay. That I must have some sort of insider's knowledge into American foreign policy, which is bizarre to me, to say the least, but nevertheless, I had to contend with that. Americans, I found, were baffled because they did not understand why Pakistanis were not more grateful for the aid, for example, that America was sending to Pakistan. What the average American doesn't realize is that the average Pakistani never really becomes the recipient of that aid. But yet those Pakistanis know that the American government keeps pouring this aid into Pakistan. Where it goes, nobody really knows, right? That's another story. In terms of foreign policy, I would have a lot of Pakistanis ask me, what, Cynthia, why is your government doing this, this, and this? And I would say, yeah, to bus. Why would I know? Why don't you tell me why your government's doing what it's doing? How many, at universities or schools where I would deliver lectures or I was invited to speak, all of them would look at me as if I was a subject matter expert. And I would say, I am no more a subject matter expert than you are. How many of you have any impact on what your government's foreign policy is? Raise your hand. So I would actually get them to try to raise, how many of you? Tell me right now.
You probably just
and none of them.
Zero, right?
I said, so to the American people.
Yeah.
The average American has no idea in terms of what their country's foreign policy is.
Right.
So too, I would imagine any of you, if I were to quiz you what your country's foreign policy is, would you be able to articulate a reasonable position?
Right.
And of course, you
Yes.
know, so we had to really sort of have this conversation. I had to pull it out of them and help them see from my perspective that, let's separate people from policy. The people are largely ignorant of their country's policy. Your jihad should be to educate and inform yourself so that you can articulate your position in your country and your faith and represent your faith and culture and country well. But don't take out your anger and frustration on people who likely have nothing to do with that foreign policy.
Yes.
Right? Separate the people from the policy. That was my constant mantra to the people that I would encounter in Pakistan.
And it's a difficult thing to do in Pakistan because people, there's a very one-dimensional view, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're an American, so you're responsible for everything your country does.
Correct.
Right? Which is true for us, right? You're a Pakistani and you're responsible. It's like this Islamophobia that's kind of spread across the world, right? Because you're a Muslim, you're probably, so it's a tough one. Were you scared ever? Did you find were there scary moments in Pakistan?
Pakistan is an adventure ride.
Okay.
It's like voluntarily getting on a roller coaster.
Okay.
There are going to be ups and downs, and I've heard automatic gunfire. There's been, yes, scary moments for me, but it's part and parcel of traveling throughout the region.
Cynthia, when you compare yourself to the Cynthia of pre-2010 and what you thought of Pakistan and what you now know of Pakistan, the Cynthia of 2017, how different are these two Cynthias?
Polar opposites. I knew nothing about Pakistan before. I had no preconceived notions. I mean, you hear about things in the media, but I just dismissed those things. I had no aspirations of actually ever traveling to Pakistan until I was invited into the country. And I can just simply say that from the small bits that I've learned, and I know a fraction of a fraction really at the end of the day, but what I do know now as opposed to what I learned before, I wish more Americans would be able to experience something similar, because that would help us form and shape our foreign policy, our individual policy as it relates to who we vote for, who we want to put into office. Because I tell you, had I not experienced what I experienced in Pakistan, I may have wanted to vote for someone else in this previous presidential campaign.
Interesting, really interesting. That's a deep impact on the perspective, right?
Yes.
So, your documentary,
Yes.
when it comes out. So when will it come out? And when it comes out, how do you propose to use it to showcase to the people in the West and primarily in the US? How do you propose to do that?
Like I say, we're in the middle of production, so we have at least another 6 to 9 months of production,
And there's
filming, and then there's post-production that has to take place. So we're looking at least a good year, is what I estimate.
Okay.
My goal is to shock the Western viewer but in different ways.
Right.
I don't want gratuitous shock value.
Right.
When Westerners ask me, is there indoor plumbing in Pakistan, I know it will be easy to shock them with the things that I've seen, but many people, because of the nature of how the media portrays Pakistan, they think that all women wear shuttlecock burqas and are, stitching clothes in the back of a, mud hut somewhere. They have no idea that there are, while that is a part of the reality, there are also very strong women who are breaking barriers in the country, and there are men who support these women breaking down barriers. And these are things that I've known for the past few years. Female commandos, lady fighter pilots. To be able to spend time with these really strong women is remarkable. Just by virtue of the fact that the female fighter pilots, for example, they choose to remain single. Because if they were to get married and they were to have children, they'd lose the training. Being a pilot would put them out of commission for an indefinite amount of time. So these women go against cultural type. In Pakistan, they choose to not get married, they choose to not have children because they want to pursue their passions. And the handful of female fighter pilots that I met, I expected them all to have come from military families. The reality was that most of them did not. And they had to convince their parents, no, this is what I want to do. They had their own internal battles. And finally, they got their parents' support. And of course, they had their commanding officer support. And they had their male colleagues' support, too. They wouldn't be able to do the things that they do without that support. So it's not just capitalizing on the words that the often misused words, and the words, frankly, that I don't agree with, of women's empowerment. I don't like that lexicon because it oftentimes isolates and ostracizes the opposite side. This is really about community empowerment and showing women in a very different way than what we have come to know them in the media, and showing the men in a very different way than what we've come to know them in the media. They're not all angry bearded mullahs running around with Kalashnikovs. There are artists, there are healthcare practitioners, there are people who are doing beautification projects because that's what their personal passion is.
And they're good mullahs as well, right?
And I guess so. I guess there are good mullahs. Of course. But the way it's described in the Western lexicon is that all angry bearded mullahs, and so we want to be able to show that yes, there are mullahs that are not so angry. Maybe all of them are bearded, maybe some of them are unbearded, I don't know. But the point is that there's more to the story than what we've historically been fed.
You've touched a really core issue here, Cynthia, that, there are some, it's what people are comfortable with. So there are women who are comfortable wearing a niqab, a shuttlecock burqa, by choice, really, and no pressure. And there are some who don't, and there's some who like wearing the hijab and some who don't. And I think people in the West also need to be aware there are certain choices people don't make because of compulsions or gender misogynist pressures, There are choices they make because they feel comfortable with that. I think you must have come across that as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, what's your favorite story about Pakistan before we end?
Well, Pakistan has taught me so much, I think, about myself. And one of the stories that I like to share is the story about this Western woman who was traveling throughout rural Punjab, and she saw these women walking 3 hours every day to go collect water. And this Western woman took it upon herself to invest in having a water well, put into the local village so that these women wouldn't have to walk those hours to collect the water. And the Western woman just knew that the village was going to love this, and it turns out they hated it. Why did they hate it? Because the women loved walking that 3 hours to get their water because they got to have time away from the family, time away from the kids and the husbands.
And getting together and chatting.
They have their own chat time, their own gup shop, their own way of being able to communicate and get away. And that to me is a symbol of this Western woman at a micro and a macro scale. That instead of, she meant the best. She did that with the best of intentions. But what she should have done was a little bit more research into the local cultures and the local customs, because maybe, just maybe, those locals were happy the way they were and they didn't need that additional bit of aid.
This is so interesting. So I just a quick wrap up. You're going to be doing 5 documentaries, one on each province. Help us understand that.
So the plan is that this will be a mini series.
A mini series.
A mini series, in that each of the provinces is equally and fairly represented.
Okay.
How it turns out, I don't know. That will ultimately depend upon the network that picks it up.
Okay.
But I am very hopeful that it will be a mini series.
It is? Okay. Cynthia, thank you very much for your time. It's really, I know this is just the start of a journey. We hope we're able to have more conversations in the future. Wish you all the best in your project. And I believe you're heading back to Pakistan sometimes later this year. Wish you safe travels. And I know the country is waiting for you. You know it better than most. So good luck, and thank you for being such a great ambassador for Pakistan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bahut shukriya.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was Cynthia Dawn Ritchie, an amazing story. I'm sure we'll be hearing more about her in the future, and we look forward to her documentaries, her mini-series on Pakistan, or this paagul umreekee larki. This paagul umreekee larki will hopefully do a lot more for Pakistan. Thank you very much, and have a very good night.
I travel the country, visiting each province, learning from